major silver lining to the cloudy day. Some beautiful diffused light is streaming through the front windows this afternoon, and it's just enough to get me motivated to film a video. Hi everyone, Rosie here. Welcome back to my channel. It's once again quite late for this wrap up, but as everyone so kindly commented on my February wrap up, which just went up, better late than never. So let's talk about what I read in March before I forget it entirely. Actually, I've probably forgotten most of it, but thankfully I wrote good notes and we can refer to those. So if it sounds like I'm reading a lot, that is why. The first book I finished in March was The Fran Lebowitz Reader by Fran Lebowitz. This was a collection of funny essays and memoir snippets. This edition was published in 1994, but the works were written in the 70s and 80s. She has a very snarky, opinionated, life observational type of humor, very much set in, New York in the 70s and 80s, in that sort of artistic community. Some of the works were incredible and I loved them, and some of them almost made me want to DNF the book. I found it super variable. One of them where I feel like there's a really good example of this is The Servant Problem. So upon reaching a certain level of financial success, Fran decides that the next thing she wants to put money towards is she wants to hire a house cleaner. She wants to outsource some of her domestic labor. And in the first half, when she's talking about hiring and then working with the person who she hires to be her house cleaner, I hated it. Something about her tone and the framing of the encounter felt so entitled and mean and not at all funny. Even though I can see how the situation would be hilarious and would be so aggravating, the way she is portraying it and the point of view that we're seeing it from just feels cruel. But then she concludes that the solution is clearly to send apartments out to be washed like clothes, and smoothly slides into the potential problems of going to pick your apartment up at the dry cleaners and finding out that they've mixed it up with someone else's apartment, and it's hilarious. So I think a lot of the places I had issues with it, it was satire, but the joke wasn't landing, or the joke wasn't coming through for whatever reason. The places where it was funny were where it did still connect. So it was kind of hit and miss, but overall enjoyable, glad to have read it. I have no idea why I bought this in the first place, but I guess it was a fun one to clear off my TBR in the end. I picked up The Middlesteins by Jami Attenberg. This was a read or reject book. So that was one of the ones I have on a list that I want to either try and read it or just don't. And so I started this book. On page 1, there's this discussion of a grossly overweight 5-year-old girl and how it's just a gross description of this child. And I don't care if this one page is setting up an amazing novel. That was enough to make me go no, I don't want to read that. I don't care what comes after. It just icked. So I DNF'd it, and the reader reject pile had the desired effect, I guess. I also had All Grown Up on my TBR, which was another book by Jami Attenberg, and when I read this, I was in a really ruthless TBR culling mood, so I also removed that from my TBR because, I don't know, just wasn't in the mood for her books anymore. So many other exciting ones I could read, including the next book, which I did finish, The Prisoner of Limnos by Lois McMaster Bujold. This was Penric and Desdemona number 7. Okay, I have a note to do the Penric and Desdemona general intro because this is of course a fresh video. So this is a series of fantasy novellas about Penric, who is a sorcerer, and he has his powers through Desdemona, a demon who is inside of him, and they work together as a team. And it's just the sweetest, most wonderful series of novellas. The world building is so delightful. I've been flying through these books. So the past several books in the series at this point had followed each other in relatively close succession, and I really like that. I love where we really pick up where one leaves off and just continue on with the adventure, because I always want to know more about what's happening. And we'd had a book or two where I felt like Penrick's story was a bit adrift. At this point, I totally forgave that because it built into something so perfect. There's this one amazing new character who's become so important over the past few books at this point, and such a whole host of other side characters who are growing as well, and so delightful. This book continues the amazing world building. In this one, we get a fantastic island nunnery, which also serves as a prison, and also a bit of a dive into the many diverse forms of happy relationships, which is just delightful. I know I've said that so many times about this book, but it's so true. And the writing is so punchy. At this point, I've made the note that I'm pretty sure I prefer an expertly crafted novella to all but the very best novels. Maybe my brain just has no attention span anymore, but I think when it's done right, the short format forces a level of focus, and like, you have to know your plot, you have to know what everything is doing. If you do it right, it's so amazing as a reader. At least for me, that's what I love. There's this quote that I love that's like, sorry I wrote you a long letter, I didn't have time to write a short one. You know, sort of saying sometimes it's harder to really condense it down to that purest, most perfect form. And I think these novellas often, for me, reach that in the fantasy format. So I immediately read two more. I read The Orphans of Raspay, which is number 8, and The Physicians of Vilnoc, which is number 9. I don't have like detailed notes for either of these because, as you can see, I just talked a lot about these books. But I do want to note that I am not usually someone who has a crush on book characters. It's just not, I don't know, something I've ever really done. But if I was, Penrick, oh, he would be so high up there. Wow, he is just an incredible character. One of my favorite, main characters to see adventures from, I guess, that I've read lately. He's really intelligent and he's super capable at everything he does. But he's got such a great sense of humor, and he's the biggest sweetie and is just like so lovely about all of the characters that he really cares about. I've been loving following his story. I've been trying to clear off some general TBR stuff, as you have noticed, and I decided to try The Family Law by Benjamin Law. So this has been lingering on my TBR for a very long time. I'm pretty sure I got it when I first got an e-reader in 2016. So that's what, like 7 years ago now? No, 6. 6 years ago? I don't know. However long ago that was. I have had it ever since then. It's an Australian comedian's memoir about his childhood and his family. And I think this book just got a really ruthless version of me. I read 7 pages and then there was a really gross rape joke and I just stopped reading. The author and the people he's talking to and who are like, he's remembering talking to about this joke, immediately refer to themselves as horrible people for making this joke, but like, it just wasn't a vibe. And like I said, I was feeling ruthless, so I DNF'd it. And instead read Rat Queens, which is a series of fantasy graphic novel comics. I've been reading the trade paperback bind-ups. So in this session, I read Rat Queens Volume 2, The Far-Reaching Tentacles of Nergoth by Kurtis J. Wiebe, Rat Queens Volume 3, Demons by Kurtis J. Wiebe, and Rat Queens Volume 4, High Fantasies by Kurtis J. Wiebe. And also there's a bunch of illustrators and stuff that'll be in the description. I don't have them noted here. I think I talked about these in a vlog, so I will link that up here. And my next non-fiction book was The Husband Hunters, American Heiresses Who Married into the British Aristocracy by Anne de Courcy. This was another non-fiction book that had been lingering on my TBR, and I decided to finally just say, okay, I'm going to try it. It covers the phenomenon of wealthy young American women marrying broke British aristocrats in the 1870s through early 1900s. It's fairly informative. I was familiar with this concept, but I learned a lot more about the differences in how the two societies worked at the time and the two approaches to inheritances that really made this situation happen. I'd always wondered why there were so many young, wealthy American girls with no brothers, because I figured that was why they had so much money that they were inheriting, that they were bringing to these marriages. And I figured, why were there so many more girls in the US in that situation than in the UK? That didn't make sense. But it turns out it's actually because American fathers were just giving equal portions of their fortunes to their sons and daughters. So aristocratic British girls had like virtually no inheritance because everything went to their older brother, whereas American girls often got a large share of their father's fortune and often got it as a dowry when they were young. So there's a lot of really interesting information. Maybe I'm just really nerdy to find that part so fascinating, but I really enjoyed learning about the intricacies of how that actually worked. Overall, though, I found it a bit patchy. Some of the chapters felt really, really smoothly written, but other times it felt like things were being presented in just like not the right order or ways that were kind of confusing. And it didn't feel as well researched as it could have been at times. I'm not an expert on this and I can't have any like details that I can pull out. It was just a vibe. I feel kind of bad saying that, but overall it was interesting, but not amazing. Towards the end of the month, I decided to continue the trying nonfiction streak, and I picked up from someplace else a memoir by Ralph Osborne. I bought this in a used bookstore like 5 or 6 years ago, 6 years ago now, I guess, and decided I finally needed to just like try it, see it. Am I ever going to actually read this book? And there's nothing wrong with it, it just did not grab me at all, so I DNF'd it after like 5 pages, and I decided to declutter it. Maybe it's great, but as you can see, I'm in the mood to DNF right now, and I am fully living for it. Let me know down below, what was the favorite book you read in March, or at this point, probably April, and what is the most recent book that you have DNF'd? I would love to hear about them. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like down below. If you would like to see more of my videos, make sure you hit subscribe, and thank you for watching.